I never planned on staying in this apartment long. It was supposed to be temporary, one of those just until I find something better kind of places. But then I met her, and the walls themselves started to feel different. It was the way she answered the door the first time. Not rush, not careless. She opened it slowly, like she already knew who was standing on the other side. She had this careful presence, like every gesture was deliberate. Mrs. Hale, my landlady. Mid-40s maybe. Dark hair that fell just past her shoulders, eyes that lingered too long when she looked at me. She wore a faded sweater that day, sleeves pushed halfway up, and I noticed her hands before I noticed anything else, ink smudges on her thumb, a thin gold band she didn't wear on her ring finger anymore. "You're early," she said. I laughed because I didn't know what else to do. "You said 6. It's 6. 6 in my world is usually later," she murmured, stepping aside. The apartment smelled faintly of cinnamon and something sharper, wine already uncorked. On the table sat 2 glasses, not one. And before I could make sense of that, her sister appeared from the kitchen. Blonde, younger by a few years, but with the same bone structure. She grinned at me like she already knew the punchline of a joke I hadn't heard yet. "This is the tenant you keep talking about?" she teased. Her voice had a lightness to it, but the way Mrs. Hale shot her a look made it clear, the teasing hit too close. I told myself to play it cool, to just sit, smile, and not read too much into anything. But every detail kept pulling me in, the way her sweater slipped at the shoulder, the way she leaned on the counter instead of sitting across from me, as though distance was safer. We started with small talk. Rent, leaky faucets, whether the heat would hold up through the winter. I answered politely, maybe too politely, but my focus wasn't on the words. It was on her silences. Every time she stopped speaking, I felt her searching for a different topic, one that hovered just out of reach. Her sister did most of the talking. Stories about failed dates, work gossip, the kind of chatter meant to fill space. But I kept catching Mrs. Hale's eyes flicker toward me, then away again, like a reflex she couldn't quite control. When the wine made its slow circle, I tried not to notice how her hand brushed mine as she passed the glass. Tried not to notice how she didn't pull back right away. "So," her sister said, leaning forward with a grin, "are you always this quiet, or is it just my sister making you nervous?" The room seemed to freeze. Mrs. Hale shifted in her chair, cleared her throat, but didn't correct her. Didn't laugh it off. "I'm not nervous," I managed, though my voice betrayed me. She finally looked at me then, really looked, as though she was measuring the truth of what I just said. There was no smile, no joke to soften it. Just her eyes holding mine, longer than they should have. The clock ticked too loudly. The wineglass felt heavy in my hand. Her sister's chatter blurred into background noise. Then Mrs. Hale leaned in slightly, as if testing how close was too close. Her lips parted, just enough for a whisper, but she didn't speak. She let the silence hang there, like a question, like an invitation, until the room itself seemed to tilt toward her. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't the only one fighting something back. If anyone else had been sitting across from me that night, it would have been easy. A drink, polite conversation, then a quick excuse to leave before things blurred. But with her, nothing stayed simple. Mrs. Hale, no, I'd started thinking of her as Clara when her sister called her that, carried the kind of presence that made you careful with every word. Not because she demanded it, but because you wanted to be worthy of the space she gave you. The wine was doing its slow work, softening edges, but it wasn't alcohol that made me restless. It was the way her sleeve slipped again, bearing a thin scar at her wrist, faint but there. My eyes lingered a second too long, and she noticed. She pulled the fabric back down without a word. That was when the danger of the night settled in. Not because she was older, not because she was my landlady, but because she was carrying something private, something fragile, and I wanted to reach for it. Her sister excused herself at some point, mumbling about phone calls, leaving the two of us in the low glow of a single lamp. The silence stretched. She broke it with a quiet laugh, but it wasn't the kind that eased tension, it deepened it. "You probably think this is inappropriate," she said, swirling the wine in her glass. I should have agreed. I should have laughed, brushed it off, reminded her I was just a tenant. Instead, I asked, "Do you think it is?" Her lips parted, then pressed together. She didn't answer right away. "It's complicated," she finally murmured. "I haven't let someone sit here with me like this in a long time." Her honesty hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to ask why. Divorce? A broken engagement? A loneliness she wouldn't admit out loud? But I didn't. I only said, "I'm glad you did." The air between us thickened. I noticed the way her hand gripped the stem of her glass a little too tightly. The way she avoided meeting my eyes, then did, as though punishing herself for the instinct to look away. I caught myself memorizing things I had no right to. Her breathing when it slowed, the way the faintest dimple appeared when she tried not to smile, the line of her collarbone disappearing beneath her sweater. Every detail made me feel both closer and more distant, like I was standing at the edge of something I shouldn't cross. I started, but couldn't finish. Leave? Thank her for the wine? Pretend I didn't want to stay? She leaned forward then, setting her glass down with a soft clink. Her hand brushed mine, just a graze like static, but she didn't pull away this time. "Stay a little longer," she said softly, not quite meeting my gaze. My pulse hammered in my throat. I opened my mouth, something reckless already forming on my tongue, words I wasn't sure I could take back, and then I shut it again. The silence between us felt louder than anything I could have said. I don't know when the night shifted, but it did. The air felt heavier, as if the walls themselves knew too much. She hadn't moved her hand. That faint brush against mine had turned into a resting weight, just her fingertips grazing my skin, but enough to anchor me there, keep me from saying the sensible words that kept pushing at the back of my throat. "This isn't," I started, my voice breaking into the hush between us. Her eyes lifted then, catching mine. "I know." She didn't finish the thought. Neither did I. And that was the most dangerous part. We were circling something unnamed, both of us aware, either willing to cut it off. The silence stretched, until a sound broke it. A phone buzzing, sharp against the quiet. She flinched and pulled her hand back as though caught. The device vibrated again on the counter, screen lighting up with a name I didn't recognize. She stared at it a beat too long before flipping it face down. "Sorry," she murmured, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. But her voice was tight, as though the interruption meant more than she wanted me to see. I leaned back slightly, trying to create space, but my body betrayed me. I couldn't stop stealing glances at her profile, the slope of her shoulder, the curve of her mouth when she pressed it into a thin line. I told myself to breathe, to step away before this spiraled. But instead I said, "You don't have to explain." That was the wrong thing to say. Her head turned toward me sharply, eyes flickering with something, pain, maybe gratitude, maybe both. "I wasn't going to," she whispered. The air grew charged again. I wanted to ask what the call meant, who it was. But more than that, I wanted to reach across the small distance between us and close it. My hand twitched against my knee. Before I could move, a knock rattled the door. Sharp, unexpected. We both froze. "Clara?" A woman's voice. The sister returning. She shot me a look, half warning, half plea. Without speaking, she stood, straightened her sweater, and crossed the room. I watched her shoulders stiffen as she opened the door just wide enough. "Oh, you're still here?" her sister said, her tone teasing, but there was an undercurrent I couldn't place. Clara brushed it off with a vague excuse about catching up, keeping her body angled to block the doorway. I sat there, pulse thudding in my ears, knowing I should stand, grab my jacket, and leave before this web pulled tighter. But when the sister finally left again, Clara closed the door slowly, her back resting against it for a moment, as though bracing herself. When her eyes found mine across the room, something inside me gave way. She walked back, silent, stopping just close enough that I could feel her warmth. Her fingers hesitated in the air between us, hovering as if deciding whether to touch me again. I should have stood. I should have walked out. Instead, I stayed perfectly still. And for the first time, I wasn't sure which one of us was about to cross the line first. The room felt too small after her sister left, like the walls had inched closer just to hear what we wouldn't say aloud. Clara stood in front of me, her arms crossed loosely over her chest, but it wasn't defense. It was restraint. I should have stood. I should have thanked her for the wine, for the company, and left. Instead, my voice came out low, tighter than I meant. "Why did you ask me to stay?" Her eyes flickered, almost like I'd struck a nerve. She glanced away, then back again, as though she was searching for a safe answer and couldn't find one. "Because—" she stopped, exhaled. "Because it's been a long time since I wanted someone in this room with me." The honesty stunned me. Not the words themselves, but the way she said them, without decoration, without apology. I swallowed hard. "Clara!" She shook her head, cutting me off, and her hand lifted halfway before dropping again. "Don't say it. Whatever you're about to say, don't." But I couldn't stop. "I noticed things," I said quietly. Her brow furrowed. "What things?" My pulse hammered, but I forced myself forward. "The way you hold your glass too tightly when you're nervous. The scar on your wrist you try to cover. The way you never look at me too long, but when you do—" I broke off, shaking my head. "I notice." She stood very still. Her lips parted slightly, her breath caught. For a moment I thought she would laugh it off, pretend I'd imagined everything. Instead, she stepped closer. "And what do you think it means?" I hesitated. The safe thing was to retreat, to pass it off as nothing, but the words pressed out anyway. "It means I want to be closer to you. And I don't know if I should." The silence after that was suffocating. Her gaze locked on mine, unreadable, but her hand moved again, slowly, deliberately, until her fingers rested lightly on my forearm. The warmth of her touch shot through me like a current. I wanted to pull back. God, I tried. But I didn't move. "You're too young," she whispered, but there was no conviction behind it. Only a tremor. "And you don't want me to leave?" I whispered back. Her eyes shimmered with something between defiance and surrender. For a breathless moment, the world shrank to nothing but the distance between our mouths. I leaned forward without meaning to, until I could feel her breath against mine. Then she froze. Her hand tightened on my arm, holding me there, not pulling me closer, not pushing me away. We stared at each other in silence, suspended on the edge of something we couldn't undo. And then, in a voice so soft I almost missed it, she asked, "What happens if we don't stop?" Her question, "What happens if we don't stop?" still echoed in the room when another sound cut through it. A dull vibration. Her phone again, this time persistent. Clara closed her eyes like she was praying for it to disappear, but finally she reached for it. I watched her face shift the instant she saw the name on the screen. Not irritation this time. Guilt. "Excuse me," she whispered, stepping into the kitchen. Her voice was low as she answered, but I caught fragments. No, not tonight. I told you, please don't. She turned her back, but her hand trembled as she gripped the counter. I sat there, blood running hot, a dozen questions crawling up my throat. Who was on the other end? Someone who still had a claim on her? An ex who didn't want to stay an ex? When she returned, she looked older, somehow smaller, the air of control stripped away. I should explain, she said, but her voice cracked. I waited, pulse hammering. It was my husband, she said finally, though her fingers twisted together when she spoke the word. We're separated. Not divorced. Not yet. The admission landed heavy between us. My chest tightened, not with judgment, but with the sudden realization of how deep I was standing in waters I couldn't measure. She mistook my silence for something else. I didn't mean for tonight to happen. I didn't mean for any of this to. She stopped herself, covering her mouth with her hand as though she'd already said too much. I forced myself to speak, though my throat was dry. Why tell me now? Her eyes snapped to mine, raw and wet. Because if you knew from the start, you would have kept your distance. And I didn't want you to. The honesty hit harder than the revelation. It stripped away all the careful silences, all the excuses. She wanted me here. She wanted this. And she hated herself for it. I stood abruptly, unable to sit still. Pacing the small room, I dragged a hand through my hair. Clara, do you realize what you're asking of me? You're young, yes, I know. She cut in sharply. And I'm married on paper. It's a disaster, I know. But when you walked through that door... Her voice wavered. I felt something I haven't felt in years. I can't just pretend it didn't happen. I stopped pacing, stared at her. The room felt like it was closing in again. I wanted to be angry, to walk away, but all I felt was this ache in my chest, the ache of knowing she was as trapped in this as I was. You should tell me to leave, I said, softer than I meant. Her lips parted, but she didn't. Instead, she whispered, Do you want me to? The question froze me. Because the truth was, I didn't. Not even a little. We stood there in silence, hearts pounding, neither of us moving. The weight of the revelation didn't push us apart. It pulled us closer, like gravity. And that terrified me more than anything. Her question, Do you want me to leave? Hung in the air like a thread neither of us dared cut. I took a step closer, then stopped, afraid of what it meant. My chest felt too tight, my thoughts pulling in opposite directions. You're asking me to choose between what's right and what I can't stop wanting, I said finally. My voice sounded foreign in my own ears. Clara's hands trembled where they rested on the edge of the counter. You think I don't feel the same? Her tone was sharp, but underneath it I heard the break. I know every reason we shouldn't. I could list them all. And still, she shut her eyes. Still, I asked you to stay. Her honesty cracked something in me. All night I'd been dancing around words I couldn't say, feelings I shouldn't admit. But the truth was clawing its way out. I can't stop thinking about you, I whispered. Every look, every silence, you've been in my head since the day I moved in. And I told myself it was nothing, but tonight, I exhaled, shaking. Tonight made it impossible to lie about it anymore. She opened her eyes then, and the vulnerability in them nearly undid me. You're too young, she said again, but her voice wasn't conviction, it was fear. I stepped forward until only a breath separated us. Then tell me to go. Tell me this is nothing. Her lips parted, trembling, but no words came. Instead, her hand lifted, fingertips grazing my jaw. The touch was so light it could have been imagined, but the effect was shattering. I leaned into it, against every warning in my mind. I can't. she whispered. I can't tell you to go. And then it happened. The space between us collapsed. Our mouths met in a kiss that was less about passion and more about surrender. It wasn't perfect, messy, trembling, desperate, but it was real. It was everything we had been holding back spilling out at once. When we finally pulled apart, her forehead rested against mine, both of us breathless. This will ruin me, she said, her voice cracking. Or it will save you, I answered, though I wasn't sure which I believed. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, of everything we'd confessed without meaning to, of the choice we made without speaking it aloud. I thought she might push me away then, end it before it spiraled further. Instead, she held me tighter, as though she was terrified I'd vanish if she let go. And for the first time that night, I stopped fighting it. I let myself hold her back. Neither of us had the answers. Neither of us knew what tomorrow would look like. But in that moment, in that fragile closeness, the only thing that mattered was that we weren't alone in wanting it. The kiss should have been the end. A mistake. A fleeting slip of impulse we could both deny in the morning. But it wasn't. It lingered. Even after we pulled apart, even after we stood there in silence, the truth of it sat between us, undeniable, immovable. Clara pressed her hands to her face for a moment, as though trying to collect herself. I don't know what happens next, she whispered. Neither do I admitted. But I know I don't regret it. Her hands lowered, and her eyes searched mine, desperate and uncertain. For once, she didn't hide. You don't understand. I spent years pretending, waiting for someone to see me. And then you walked in, and I couldn't look away. I should have ignored it. I tried. But tonight proved. Her voice broke. I don't want to anymore. Her vulnerability disarmed me. She wasn't the confident landlady anymore. She was just Clara, flawed, fragile, craving connection. And it hit me. That was the woman I'd fallen for, not the untouchable version I'd built in my head. We talked then, really talked. About her separation, about how lonely the house had felt before I arrived. About how she feared she was too old for me, and how I feared I wasn't enough for her. Each confession peeled away another layer until nothing was left but honesty. The clock ticked past midnight, but neither of us moved. The wine glasses sat empty, forgotten. What mattered was the rawness of being seen. I don't know if we're making a mistake, she said at last, her voice steady now. I reached for her hand, lacing my fingers through hers. Maybe we are. But it feels like the first thing that's been real in a long time. Her grip tightened, and for the first time that night she smiled, small, hesitant, but real. Then let's not waste it. We didn't have every answer. Tomorrow would bring complications, maybe even regrets. But in that moment, we made a quiet promise, to stop running from what was already there. The woman who once kept her distance now leaned into me, and I, who once tried to pretend I wasn't drawn to her, finally stopped pretending. And that was the change. Not that we crossed the line, but that we chose not to go back. As I left her apartment in the early hours, the air cold against my skin, I knew life wouldn't be the same. It was dangerous, it was flawed, it was messy. But it was ours. Speech Balloon, did you enjoy the story? Red Heart, what moment hit you the hardest? Sparkles, what kind of stories would you like to hear next? Forbidden romances, emotional slow burns, or something completely different?